In the bustling heart of a large city stood a train station, its floors filled with the constant movement of people coming and going, each in their own world, each carrying stories of departure and return. Amidst the chatter, the announcements, and the hurried footsteps of the commuters, there was one figure that had become a constant presence. A German shepherd, sitting patiently in the corner of the station's waiting area. His name was Kaiser, a large, strong dog with a glossy coat of black and tan. His eyes, deep and soulful, watched the comings and goings of the crowd with an unwavering attention. For years, Kaiser had been coming to this very spot every day, and no matter the season, no matter the weather, he was always there. He never moved from his place, never strayed far from the spot where he had first arrived. His paws were worn from the countless hours spent sitting, his fur sometimes matted, but his determination was unmistakable. People in the station had gotten used to seeing him. Some would stop to pet him, others would glance at him with curiosity. But what set Kaiser apart was that, despite the years that passed, he was always there, waiting. And so the questions started. Who was he waiting for? They would ask, exchanging puzzled looks. Some speculated that he was a stray who had just found a quiet corner to rest, but others had noticed something different, something deeper in his eyes. It was as if he was waiting for someone. The story of Kaiser soon spread across the city, as people began sharing photos of the loyal dog on social media. It wasn't long before local news outlets picked up the story, fascinated by the sight of this dog who never seemed to give up, who never seemed to lose hope. Comments flooded in, from people who had seen him every day to those who had heard the rumors about him. Some even traveled to the station just to catch a glimpse of the dog whose story seemed to embody something deeply human. One of the first to notice Kaiser's devotion was a young woman named Emma. She had just moved to the city for a new job and was trying to adjust to the fast-paced life of the station, often feeling overwhelmed by the constant rush. But every morning, as she passed by Kaiser's usual spot, something about his calm presence brought her a sense of peace. No matter how chaotic the world around them became, he was always there, waiting. At first, she thought he must belong to someone who worked nearby, someone who would come for him at the end of each day. But as the weeks turned into months, she began to wonder. Emma was not the only one. People began to share their thoughts online, speculating that Kaiser was waiting for a long-lost owner. Maybe a soldier returning from war, or a man lost in a tragic accident. They saw in his waiting a symbol of something greater, the bond between a dog and his human, a bond that could not be broken even by time or distance. But Kaiser didn't seem to care about the crowds gathering around him, nor the cameras aimed at him from every angle. He remained focused, his gaze unwavering, his ears twitching at the sound of every train that arrived. No matter how many people approached him, tried to coax him into leaving his spot, or offered him food and water, Kaiser would simply look up at them, as if acknowledging their kindness, but then return to his quiet, patient waiting. Day after day, week after week, and month after month, the cycle continued. Kaiser's fame grew, and the world began to see him as a symbol of loyalty. People from all walks of life shared his story, expressing admiration for his unwavering dedication, for his belief in a reunion that seemed more and more improbable with each passing year. But Kaiser never wavered. The years went by and still he waited. And then, one morning, as the sunlight streamed through the large glass windows of the station, something changed. A new face appeared among the commuters, a young man, looking lost, as if he had just stepped off a train from somewhere far away. His clothes were slightly worn, his face tired, but there was something familiar about him. He had a certain air about him that made Emma pause. She had seen that look before. The look of someone searching for something, perhaps something they had long lost. Without knowing why, she found herself watching him closely, wondering who he was, what had brought him to the station that morning. And then, in that quiet moment, as the young man's eyes scanned the crowd, their gazes met. And for a fleeting second, it was as if time itself had stopped. The man's eyes widened in recognition, his breath catching in his chest. He took a hesitant step forward, his body stiffening, and then another, moving with slow, deliberate steps toward the waiting dog. Kaiser's head lifted as the man approached, his tail giving a tentative wag. The world seemed to hold its breath as the two locked eyes. And then, in a moment that felt like destiny, the man reached out with trembling hands and called softly, "Kaiser!" And just like that, the waiting was over. But the story was far from simple. The truth was far more complex than anyone had ever imagined. As the man called out Kaiser's name, the dog stood up, his entire body trembling with excitement. His tail began to wag furiously, and his ears perked up as if he had heard the sweetest melody in the world. Slowly, with a gentle but determined stride, Kaiser moved toward the man, his eyes never leaving him for a second. The air around them seemed to pulse with an unspoken connection, an understanding that transcended words, as if the years of waiting had built to this very moment. When the man finally knelt down, Kaiser immediately buried his head in the crook of his outstretched arms, as if he had waited an eternity to be reunited. People watching in the station felt the weight of the moment. There was no cheering, no clapping, just a deep, collective silence, as if the entire world was witnessing something sacred, something that needed no explanation. Emma, standing at a distance, watched the scene unfold in awe. She had seen countless people come and go from the station, but this was different. This was a reunion that seemed to embody something larger than life. It was as if time itself had folded, bringing together two souls who had been separated by fate but never by love. The man gently stroked Kaiser's head, speaking softly to him. "I knew you'd be here, boy. I never thought I'd see you again, but I knew you'd wait for me." Kaiser whimpered softly, his eyes fixed on the man with an intensity that made it clear. He had never given up hope. His waiting was not just the result of a dog's loyalty. It was something deeper, something instinctive. Kaiser had always known that his human, his comrade, would return. It wasn't just a belief, it was an unshakable certainty. Emma felt a knot form in her throat. She had assumed, like so many others, that the man was Kaiser's long-lost owner. Perhaps a soldier who had gone off to war, or a man who had disappeared in an accident. But as she observed the reunion, she realized that there was something more profound to the story than she had anticipated. Kaiser had been waiting, not for someone who had been gone for years, but for someone who had never really left him at all. The man, who had finally risen to his feet, continued speaking to Kaiser, but his voice was softer now, filled with emotion. "I'm sorry it took so long, old friend. I never wanted you to wait, but I knew somewhere deep down you would be here. You always were." The crowd that had gathered, now watching in silence, began to murmur among themselves. Some of them had seen the pictures of Kaiser that had gone viral on social media, the photos that had captured his dedication, his unwavering patience. But now they saw the man with Kaiser, and their questions began to take root. Who was he, really? What was the story behind this strange and heart-wrenching loyalty? As the man stood up fully, Kaiser at his side, he turned to Emma, who was still watching from the sidelines. There was a certain calmness to his demeanor now, but it was mixed with the heaviness of someone who had endured great emotional weight. With a slight nod, he walked toward her, his steps slow but deliberate. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I can see you've been watching us. I guess it's time someone knew the whole story." Kaiser, he wasn't just waiting for me to come back. He was waiting for me to remember. Emma looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" The man sighed deeply, as if the weight of the past had been pressing on him for years. "I'm not just a soldier. I'm a part of a team, a special operations unit. We were close. I left, but not in the way people think. It wasn't an accident or a war. I was lost. I lost myself. I couldn't face coming back, because I thought I wasn't the man I used to be. I couldn't face Kaiser because I thought he deserved someone better. But he never gave up on me. He knew me even when I didn't know myself." Emma's heart ached at the raw emotion in his voice. She could see now, with clarity, that this story was not just about a dog waiting for his human. It was about the deep, complex bond between two souls who had been through trauma, loss, and a struggle for survival, but who had never truly been apart, even when they were separated. The man paused, taking a deep breath, and continued, "Kaiser was with me through everything. He was with me in the darkest moments, in the battles I fought that no one could understand. But after everything we went through, I thought I wasn't worthy of his loyalty anymore. I thought it was easier to stay away, to leave him with a better life than I could give him. But he never left me. He knew the truth long before I did." Emma's mind raced. She began to understand. Kaiser had not simply waited for the man's return. He had waited for the man to remember who he was, to find his way back to himself. Kaiser had waited, not for a soldier, but for the person who could love him the way he deserved to be loved. A person who could heal, who could face the past without running away. Kaiser had waited patiently and loyally, because he knew that, someday, his human would come to terms with his past and return to him. The man knelt down once more, this time cupping Kaiser's face in his hands. "I'm here now, buddy. I'm back. And I'm not leaving you again." The crowd that had gathered watched silently as the scene unfolded. Some had tears in their eyes, others stood in awe of the raw emotion they had just witnessed. But Emma, her heart heavy with understanding, couldn't help but feel that this story of loyalty and love would resonate far beyond the station. Kaiser's waiting had not been in vain, and now, after all these years, he could finally rest. But the truth of their bond would live on, spreading across the city, touching hearts, and reminding everyone who heard it that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply waiting. In the days following the reunion, the story of Kaiser and his loyal companions spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up the heartwarming tale, sharing it with the world. Social media exploded with comments and reactions. People from all over the globe expressing their admiration for the bond between the dog and his human. People who had never stepped foot in that city, who had never seen the train station or even knew where it was, now felt a part of the story. They shared it on their own pages, some with tears in their eyes, others with messages of hope and appreciation for the enduring power of loyalty and love. But while the world celebrated the reunion, it was clear that the man, whose name was revealed to be Lucas, still carried the weight of the years spent apart from his dog. He didn't seek out the attention, but the media and the people around him couldn't help but want to know more. They asked him questions about his past, his time in the military, about the deep connection he shared with Kaiser. Lucas answered, though he did so carefully, as if each word he spoke was a delicate thread that could unravel the fragile balance he had worked so hard to maintain. He had never intended for his story to become public knowledge. But once it was out there, Lucas realized he couldn't just walk away from it. Kaiser had been waiting for him for years, and now that the reunion had happened, Lucas felt a deep sense of responsibility. Not just to Kaiser, but to the countless others who had followed their story, who had found solace in it. The story had resonated with so many people because, in some way, everyone could relate. Everyone had loved someone or something so deeply that they would have waited forever, if it meant they could be together again. People saw their own reflections in Kaiser's waiting and in Lucas's return. The message was universal. Love was not bound by time, and loyalty was a promise that transcended all obstacles. The train station became a kind of pilgrimage site, a place where people came to pay tribute to the dog who had waited so long. Travelers, families, and even other dogs would stop by to see the spot where Kaiser had sat, sometimes leaving flowers, sometimes simply standing there in quiet reflection. Kaiser, for his part, had found a new routine. He still visited the station, though not with the same sense of urgency as before. Now he walked beside Lucas, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. They would sit together, watching the trains arrive and depart, their bond stronger than ever. But even with the overwhelming support and attention, Lucas knew that their journey was not over. He could feel that Kaiser, now fully content in his presence, still carried the echoes of those long years spent in solitude. He could tell that his dog still harbored a certain sadness, a quiet longing that had never fully left him. Lucas understood that, while their reunion was beautiful, there would still be moments of healing ahead. One evening, as they walked through the station together, Lucas stopped to gaze at the spot where Kaiser had waited all those years. He could see, in his mind's eye, the lonely dog sitting there, eyes fixed on the tracks, never wavering, never giving up. It struck him then, with a deep sense of realization, that their journey was never just about waiting for one another. It was about coming to terms with what had been lost, with the pain that each of them had carried for so long. They had both been waiting, in their own way, for the right moment to heal. "I'm sorry I couldn't be here for you sooner," Lucas whispered to Kaiser, his voice heavy with emotion. "I know it wasn't easy for you, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Kaiser tilted his head, as if understanding the depth of Lucas's words. He nudged Lucas's hand with his nose, and Lucas smiled, grateful for the silent comfort his dog offered. They stayed there for a while, simply being together, letting the moment settle around them. As the months passed, Kaiser's story continued to inspire people, but it also became a reminder of the importance of being present for the ones we love. It wasn't just the grand gestures or the dramatic reunions that mattered. It was the quiet, everyday moments, the walks, the companionship, the mutual understanding, that built the foundation of lasting love. Lucas, now back at home with Kaiser by his side, became an advocate for other military veterans and their animals. He spoke at events, sharing his own story of trauma and recovery, and how the unconditional love of a dog had helped him heal. People would often come up to him, sharing their own tales of loyalty, of pets who had waited for them to return, or family members who had stood by them through the hardest times. And all the while, Kaiser sat beside him, calm and patient, just as he always had been. But what was most striking about their story was not just the reunion. It was the realization that true loyalty doesn't always make sense to others. It doesn't need validation or recognition. It is a quiet, unspoken promise that endures through the toughest of times. Kaiser didn't wait for Lucas because he thought he would be rewarded. He waited because love was not something he was willing to give up on, no matter how long it took. Lucas and Kaiser's bond became a symbol, a beacon of hope for those who had lost faith, a reminder that love, no matter how quiet or long-lasting, could heal even the deepest wounds. And so, the world continued to watch their story unfold. People spoke of them with reverence and admiration, but they never truly understood the depth of it all. For Lucas and Kaiser, it had never been about the fame, the media, or the recognition. It had always been about finding each other again, not in the physical sense, but in the way that only true companions can, through patience, through love, and through unwavering loyalty. As the years passed, Kaiser and Lucas continued to walk side by side. Their bond, now stronger than ever, was a reminder to all who saw them that sometimes the greatest love stories are not those of grand gestures, but of quiet, unshakable devotion. And in the end, it was this devotion that made their story truly unforgettable. Life after the reunion wasn't without its challenges, though. Despite the overwhelming sense of peace that came with the return of Lucas, there were still moments of uncertainty. Times when Kaiser would look out the window, his gaze far away, as if waiting for something or someone that wasn't there. It wasn't that Kaiser didn't love Lucas. The bond between them was as strong as ever. But the years spent alone, waiting in that cold, crowded train station, had left their mark on him. The memories of his solitary vigil were etched deeply into his heart. At night, sometimes, when the lights dimmed and the house grew quiet, Kaiser would rest his head on Lucas's lap, and the weight of those lost years seemed to settle between them. Lucas would gently run his fingers through Kaiser's fur, as though trying to reassure him that there was nothing to fear anymore. They had both been through so much, Lucas with his struggles from the war, and Kaiser with the endless weight that had defined his life for so long. The dog had given everything, hoping beyond hope that his companion would return. And now Kaiser had returned the favor, healing the wounds that both of them had carried for so long. But healing takes time, and both Lucas and Kaiser were still on that journey. They would walk together in the park, slowly at first, but soon it became their favorite time of day. The routine of it, being outside in the fresh air, the sound of Kaiser's paws on the earth, was soothing. They shared these walks in comfortable silence, a mutual understanding between them that didn't need words. It was during one of these walks that Lucas met someone who would change both of their lives in ways they couldn't have imagined. On a crisp fall afternoon, as the leaves crunched beneath their feet, They passed by a small dog shelter at the edge of the park. Lucas had noticed it before, but today, something about it caught his attention. He paused, looking down at Kaiser, who was sniffing around the base of a tree. "What do you think, old boy?" he muttered, more to himself than to the dog. Kaiser looked up at him, his tail wagging slightly. Lucas smiled and walked toward the shelter. Inside, a volunteer greeted him warmly. "Hello. Looking to adopt?" she asked with a hopeful smile. Lucas hesitated, his gaze drifting over the dogs behind the chain-link fence. There were many dogs there, some playful, others shy, and a few older ones with a certain sadness in their eyes. He and Kaiser had found each other in the most extraordinary way. Could there be another animal out there who needed a chance, just like Kaiser had needed him all those years ago? "I'm not sure," Lucas said, his voice thoughtful. "But I think I just want to look around." The volunteer nodded, understanding. She led him through the rows of kennels, explaining the background of each dog they passed. But then, they came to a corner of the shelter where a small, scruffy dog sat quietly, eyes wide and hopeful. "This little one is new," the volunteer said, kneeling down to meet the dog's gaze. "Her name's Bella. She's been through a lot. She was found abandoned in a box on the side of the road. We think she might have been there for weeks alone." Lucas knelt down and looked at Bella, her fur matted and her eyes filled with the kind of sadness that only an abandoned dog could understand. She wasn't quite as big or majestic as Kaiser, but there was something in her gaze, a quiet plea, an unspoken longing. Lucas felt a pang of recognition. "You've been waiting too, haven't you?" he whispered, extending a hand to her. Bella tentatively sniffed his fingers, and after a moment, she allowed him to gently scratch behind her ears. Lucas looked at Kaiser, who was sitting patiently beside him, watching the interaction. Kaiser had always been the protector, the companion who never left his side. But now, it seemed, Kaiser understood that perhaps it was time to share that love. "I think she needs a friend," Lucas said quietly, mostly to himself. Bella, it seemed, had found her human in Lucas. And just as Kaiser had waited for Lucas all those years, perhaps it was now Bella's turn to find someone who would care for her. After spending a little more time with Bella, Lucas made the decision to adopt her. It wasn't easy, and he knew it would take time for Bella to trust him completely, but there was no question in his mind. The love he had received from Kaiser, the unconditional companionship, had shown him that there was always room in his heart for more. He couldn't leave Bella there in that shelter, waiting for something that might never come. The following week, Bella was introduced to their home. It was a careful transition at first, with Kaiser watching from a distance, unsure of this new presence. But as the days passed, something magical happened. Kaiser, the dog who had once waited for years for Lucas, slowly began to accept Bella into his life. He would nudge her gently when they went on walks, making sure she stayed close, as if guiding her along, showing her that this new life wasn't so scary after all. The two dogs would lie together, their bodies pressed close, as though sharing a bond only they could understand. Lucas watched as the two dogs became inseparable, each of them teaching the other something new about love and trust. Bella learned to play, to enjoy the simple pleasures of life, while Kaiser learned that love wasn't something that could only be given to one person. He had plenty of love to share, and now he was sharing it with Bella, in the same way he had shared it with Lucas. Their new family had found a balance, a harmony that felt right. There was a sense of peace that had settled over the house, and the walks that had once been a solemn reminder of the past now became a joyful experience, filled with laughter and the sound of paws hitting the earth. Lucas knew that he couldn't undo the pain of the past, but with Kaiser by his side, and now Bella too, he felt whole again. They had all found their way home together, and in the quiet moments, when they all sat together, watching the sunset or simply resting in the comfort of each other's presence, Lucas couldn't help but smile, knowing that the bond they shared was not just about waiting or about finding each other when it seemed impossible. It was about creating new beginnings, about healing, and about the love that could grow even in the most unexpected places. Kaiser had waited for him, and now, together, they had created a family that would never have to wait again.